Okay, magandang gabi sa inyo lahat at dito naman ako para basahin natin, no? Yung National Internal Revenue Code kasama yung mga pagbabagong idinulot ng train law, di ba? So, nagtapos tayo sa 27 eh. Tapos tayo ron sa section 27 nung last time. So, ngayon naman, ang babasahin naman natin ay ang section 28, di ba? Okay, wait lang. I-ready na lang natin yung i-ready ko lang sandali yung ayan, mga nabasa na natin kasi yung iba. So, ni-scroll ko lang. Okay. Okay, section 28. Rates of income tax on foreign corporations. Letter A, tax on resident foreign corporations. Number 1, in general, ayan, except as otherwise provided in this code, a corporation organized, authorized, or existing under laws of any foreign country engaged in trade or business within the Philippines shall be subject to an income tax equivalent to 35% of the taxable income derived in the preceding taxable year from all sources within the Philippines, provided that effective January 1, 1998, the rate of income tax shall be 34%. Pagdating naman daw ng January 1, 1999, the rate shall be 33%. January 1, 2000, 32%. Yan ang sabi niya. Hindi ko lang alam kung napalitan na ito ng train law, parang hindi pa. In the case of corporations adopting the fiscal year accounting period, the taxable income shall be computed without regard to the specific date when sales, purchases, and other transactions occur. Their income and expenses for the fiscal year shall be deemed to have been earned and spent equally for each month of the period. The reduced corporate income tax rate shall be applied on the amount computed by multiplying the number of months covered by the new rates within the fiscal year by the taxable income of the corporation for the period divided by 12. However, that the resident foreign corporation shall be granted the option to be taxed at 15% on gross income under the same conditions as provided in Section 27A. So, ang isang subject raw sa Section 27A, yung isang resident foreign corporation pwedeng i-grant o shall be granted the option, no? Pwede siyang pumili to be taxed at 15% on the gross income o yung yung reduced corporate tax rate, no? Okay, magtungo na tayo sa number 2. So, minimum corporate tax on resident foreign corporations. A minimum corporate income tax of 2% of gross income as prescribed under Section 27E of this code shall be imposed under the same conditions on a resident foreign corporation taxable. Sana ba? Under paragraph 1. Yung taxable under paragraph 1 of this subsection. Number 3. International carrier. An international carrier doing business in the Philippines shall pay a tax of 2.5% on its gross Philippine billings as defined here under. Letter A, yung international air carrier gross Philippine billings refers to the amount of gross revenue derived from carriage of persons, excess baggage, cargo, and mail originating from the Philippines in a continuous and uninterrupted flight, irrespective of the place of sale or issue and the place of payment of the ticket or passage document. Provided that tickets revalidated, exchanged, and or endorsed to another international airline form part of the gross Philippine billings, if the passenger boards a plane in a port or point in the Philippines. Provided further that for a flight which originates from the Philippines but transshipment of passenger takes place at any port outside the Philippines on another airline, only the aliquot portion of the cost of the ticket corresponding to the leg flown from the Philippines to the point of transshipment shall form part of gross Philippine billings. Magulo tong sandalan ko. Hindi ka reliable na sandalan. Okay, letter B. Na international carrier yung international shipping. Gross Philippine billings means gross revenue whether for passenger cargo or mail originating from the Philippines up to final destination, regardless of the place of sale or payments of the passage or freight documents. Number 4, offshore banking units. Ito yung mga foreign corporations eh. The provisions of any law to the contrary, notwithstanding income derived by offshore banking units authorized by the Bangko Sentral to transact business with offshore banking units, including any interest income derived from foreign currency loans granted to residents, shall be subject to a final income tax at the rate of 10% of such income. Any income of non-residents, whether individuals or corporations, from transactions with said offshore banking units shall be exempt from income tax. Number 5, tax on branch profits remittances. Any profit remitted by a branch to its head office shall be subject to a tax of 15%, which shall be based on the total profits applied or earmarked for remittance without any deduction for the tax component thereof, except na lang daw, maliban na lamang yung activities which are registered with the Philippine Economic Zone Authority. Ito yung mga PEZA registered, ito yung mga nagnenegosyo sa loob ng mga economic zones, no? The tax shall be collected and paid in the same manner as provided in sections 57 and 58 of this code, provided that interests, dividends, rents, royalties, including remuneration for technical services, salaries, wages, premiums, annuities, emoluments, or other fixed or determinable annual, periodic, or casual gains, profits, income, and capital gains received by a foreign corporation during each taxable year from all resources within the Philippines shall not be treated as branch profits unless the same are effectively connected with the conduct of its trade or business in the Philippines. Number 6, regional or area headquarters and regional operating headquarters of multinational companies. Letter A, regional or area headquarters as defined in Section 22D shall not be subject to income tax. Letter B, regional operating headquarters as defined in Section 22EE shall pay a tax of 10% of their taxable income. Number 7, haba naman ito mga foreign corporations. Mga foreign corporations na to. Tax on certain incomes received by a resident foreign corporation. Letter A, interest from any currency bank deposit and yield or any other monetary benefit from deposit substitutes and from trust funds and similar arrangements and royalties derived from sources within the Philippines shall be subject to a final income tax at the rate of 20% of such interest, provided, however, that interest income derived by a resident foreign corporation from a depository bank under the expanded foreign currency deposit system shall be subject to a final income tax at the rate of 7.5% of such interest income. Letter B, income derived under the expanded foreign current deposit system. So yung mga ganun nga daw, from foreign currency transactions, no, income derived by a depository bank under the expanded foreign currency deposit system from foreign currency transactions with local commercial banks, including branches of foreign banks that may be authorized by the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas to transact business with foreign currency deposit system units, including interest income from foreign currency loans granted by such depository banks under said expanded foreign currency deposit system to residents, shall be subject to a final income tax at the rate of 10% of such income. Any income of non-residents, whether individuals or corporations, from transactions with depository banks under the expanded system shall be exempt from income tax. Okay, letter C. Capital gains from sale of shares of stock not traded in the stock exchange. Okay. Handa natin, pinag-usapan dito yung kita. Sale of shares of stock na hindi tinitrade sa stock exchange. A final tax at the rates prescribed below is hereby imposed upon the net capital gains realized during the taxable year from the sale, barter, exchange, or other disposition of shares of stock in a domestic corporation except shares sold or deposited or through the stock exchange. So pag hindi lalagpas ng 100,000, 100,000, 5%. Tapos on any amount in excess of 100,000, 10%. Okay. So 101,000 yan, 10%, no? Letter D, intercorporate dividends. Dividends received by a resident foreign corporation from a domestic corporation liable to tax under this code shall not be subject to tax under this title. So mga dividendo na. May nabasa na tayo mga ganito kanina eh. Parang paulit-ulit lang eh. Okay. Letter B, tax on non-resident foreign corporations. So as a general rule, except as otherwise provided in this code, a foreign corporation not engaged in trade or business in the Philippines shall pay a tax equal to 35% of the gross income received during each taxable year from all sources within the Philippines. Kasali na doon yung interests, dividends, rents, royalties, salaries, premiums, annuities, emoluments, or other fixed or determinable annual, periodic, or casual gains, profits and income, and capital gains, except capital gains subject to tax under subparagraph C and D. Provided that effective January siguro to, 1, 1998, the rate of income tax shall be 34%. January 1, 1999, 33%. January 1, 2000, and thereafter, the rate shall be 32%. So 32% na lang siguro hanggang ngayon. Kasi parang hindi naman binago ng train law to eh. Sabi, January 1, 2000, and thereafter, so 32%, no? Ang binabayarang buwis ng isang foreign corporation not engaged in trade or business in the Philippines sa kanyang mga interests, dividends, rents, etc. Number 2, non-resident cinematographic film owner, lessor, or distributor. Sabi niya, shall pay a tax of 25% of its gross income from all sources within the Philippines. So, kunwari, ito yung mga Marvel, ano? Wala naman yata Marvel Philippines. Yung mga pelikula nila rito, no? 25% of its gross income from all sources within. How about yung non-resident owner or lessor of vessels chartered by Philippine nationals? They shall be subject to a tax of 4 1/2% of gross rentals, lease or charter fees from leases or charters to Filipino citizens or corporations as approved by the Maritime Industry Authority. How about yung mga non-resident owner or lessor of aircraft, machineries, and other equipment? They shall be subject to a tax of 7 1/2% of gross rentals or fees. What about yung tax on certain incomes received by a non-resident foreign corporation? Pag-usapan muna natin yung letter A, yung interest on foreign loans. A final withholding tax at the rate of 20% is hereby imposed on the amount of interest on foreign loans contracted on or after August 1, 1986. 20% daw. Okay. Letter B, intercorporate dividends. Sabi niya, final withholding tax at the rate of 15% is hereby imposed on the amount of cash and or proper dividends received from a domestic corporation which shall be collected and paid as provided in Section 57A of this code, subject to the condition that the country in which the non-resident foreign corporation is domiciled shall allow credit against the tax due from the non-resident foreign corporation. Taxes deemed to have been paid in the Philippines equivalent to 20% for 1997. Iba na ngayon yan. 1999, 32%. Thereafter, so 32% na lang ito ngayon. And 15% tax on dividends is provided in sub paragraph. Di ko na binasa yung iba kasi bumababa yung tax rate eh. So noong 1991 and 1999 and thereafter 32% daw yung babayaran na tax due. Okay, letter C, capital gains from sale of shares of stock not traded in the stock exchange. Sabi, a final tax at the rates prescribed below is hereby imposed upon the net uh, capital gains realized during the taxable year from the sale, barter, exchange, or other disposition of shares of stock in a domestic corporation except shares sold or disposed through the stock exchange. Okay, so yung non-resident foreign corporation, kunwari ay nagbenta. Kunwari, pagka nag-dispose siya, okay, ng stock na hindi traded sa stock exchange. So, pag 100,000, ganun din siya nabasa natin kanina, 5%. 100,000 and below. Pero on any amount in excess of 100,000, 10% ang sinasabi. Mas dali lang. Usan natin yung fan. Okay, magpunta na tayo sa section 29. Imposition of improperly accumulated earnings tax. Ano naman ito eh? Diba? Hirap nitong tax. Ang dami ng provision. Ang haba pa. Bawat provision ang haba. Sabi rito, in general, in addition to other taxes imposed by this title, there is hereby imposed for each tax year on the improperly accumulated taxable income of each corporation described in subsection B hereof, an improperly accumulated earnings tax equal to 10% of the improperly accumulated taxable income. Letter B, tax on corporations subject to improperly accumulated earnings tax. As a general rule, the improperly accumulated earnings tax imposed in the preceding section shall apply to every corporation formed or availed for the purpose of avoiding the income tax with respect to its shareholders or the shareholders of any other corporation, by permitting earnings and profits to accumulate instead of being divided or distributed. Ikalawa, exceptions sa tax on corporations subject to improperly accumulated earnings tax. The improperly accumulated earnings tax as provided for under this section shall not apply to publicly held corporations, banks, and other non-bank financial intermediaries and insurance companies. Hindi sila kasali doon. Letter C, evidence on purpose to avoid income tax. Number 1, prima facie evidence. The fact that any corporation is a mere holding company or investment company shall be prima facie evidence of a purpose to avoid the tax upon its shareholders or members. Ebidensya daw yun. Ikalawa naman, evidence determinative of purpose. The fact that the earnings or profits of a corporation are permitted to accumulate beyond the reasonable needs of the business shall be determinative of the purpose to avoid the tax upon its shareholders or members, unless a corporation, by the clear preponderance of evidence, shall prove to the contrary. Letter D, improperly accumulated taxable income. For purposes of this section, the term improperly accumulated taxable income means taxable income adjusted by, number 1, income exempt from tax, number 2, income excluded from gross income, number 3, income subject to final tax, and number 4, the amount of net operating loss carryover deducted and reduced by the sum of dividends actually or constructively paid and income tax paid for the taxable year, provided however that for corporations using the calendar year basis, the accumulated earnings under tax shall not apply on improperly accumulated income as of December 31, 1997. In the case of corporations adopting the fiscal year accounting period, the improperly accumulated income not subject to this tax shall be reckoned as of the end of the month comprising the 12-month period of fiscal year 97 to 98. Letter E, ng imposition of improperly accumulated earnings tax, no? Sabi niya rito, reasonable needs of the business. Sabi rito, ang ibig sabihin daw nun ay it includes the reasonably anticipated needs or pangailangan ng business. Section 30, punta tayo. Exemptions from tax on corporations. The following organizations shall not be taxed under this title in respect to income received by them as such. Letter A, labor, agricultural, or horticultural organization not organized principally for profit. So, with respect to income tax, ano sila? Exempted sila. Letter B, mutual savings bank not having a capital stock represented by shares and cooperative bank without capital stock, organized and operated for mutual purposes and without profit. Letter C, a beneficiary society, order, or association operating for the exclusive benefit of the members, such as fraternal organization operating under the lodge system, or mutual aid association, or a non-stock corporation organized by employees providing for the payment of life, sickness, accident, or other benefits exclusively for the members of such society, order, or association, or non-stock corporation of their dependents. Letter D, cemetery company owned and operated exclusively for the benefit of its members. Letter E, non-stock corporation or association organized and operated exclusively for religious, charitable, scientific, athletic, or cultural purposes. Sabi rito. Letter F, business league, chamber of commerce, or board of trade not organized for profit. Letter G, civic league or organization not organized for profit but operated exclusively for the promotion of social welfare. Letter H, a non-stock and non-profit educational institution. Letter I, government educational institution. Letter J, farmers or other mutual typhoon or fire insurance company, mutual ditch or irrigation company, mutual or cooperative telephone company, or a like organization of a purely local character, the income of which consists solely of assessments, dues, and fees collected from members for the sole purpose of meeting its expense. And letter K, farmers, fruit growers, or like association, organized and operated as a sales agent for the purpose of marketing the products of its members and turning back to them the proceeds of sales, less the necessary selling expenses on the basis of the quantity of produce finished by them. Sabi rito, notwithstanding the provisions in the preceding paragraphs, the income of whatever kind and character of the foregoing organizations from any of their properties, real or personal, or from any of their activities conducted for profit, regardless of the disposition made of such income, shall be subject to tax imposed under this code. Tungo na tayo sa 31. Ito, may clear line 31 pero may siningit dito yung train law. Sabi rito, the term taxable income means the pertinent items of gross income specified in this code, less deductions, if any, authorized for such types of income by this code or other special laws. Ang ibig daw sabihin ng taxable income ay gross income less the legal or lawful allowable deductions. Tungo tayo sa section 32. Okay. Except when otherwise provided, gross income means all income derived from whatever source, including but not limited to the following items. Sabi niya rito, compensation for services in whatever form paid, bumagsak. Ano ba yan? Including but not limited to fees, salaries, wages, commissions, and similar items. Ikalawa, gross income derived from the conduct of trade or business or the exercise of profession. Kunwari, yung mga CPA, nagsama-sama sila. Nagtayo sila ng accounting firm in the exercise of their profession. Number 3, gains derived from dealings in property. Number 4, interests. Number 5, rents. Number 6, royalties. Number 7, dividends. Number 8, annuities siguro ito. Annuities. Number 9, prizes and winnings. Number 10, pensions. And number 11, partners' distributive share from the net income of the general professional partnership. Letter B, exclusions from gross income. Ito yung mga hindi kasali. Hindi sila kasali sa gross income. Unang-una, yung life insurance, sabi. Okay. Yung proceeds nito na binayad or paid to the heirs or beneficiaries upon death of the insured, hindi siya kasali. But if such are held by the insurer under an agreement to pay interest thereon, the interest payment shall be included in gross income. Hindi kasali yung life insurance, maliban na lamang nga daw sa payment ng interests kung nakalagay yun doon sa policy. Number 2, amount received by insured as return of premium, hindi siya kasali. Number 3, gifts, bequests, and devices. Okay, hindi raw siya kasama. Provided, however, that income from such property, di ba, in cases of transfers of divided interest, shall be included in gross income. So, yung kinita mo, because of the gift na binigay sa'yo, bequest, device, or descent, no? Gift, bequest, or device, kumita ka roon, nagkaroon ka ng income doon, in cases of transfers of divided interest shall be included raw in gross income. Number 4, compensation for injuries or sickness. Di raw kasama yan. Number 5, income exempt under treaty. Okay. Number 6, retirement benefits, pensions, gratuities, etc. Alright. Yan yung sinasabi. Para lang matukoy, reasonable private benefit plan means a pension, gratuity. Ano ba yan? Laki. Ayan. A pension, gratuity, stock bonus, or profit sharing plan maintained by an employer for the benefit or some or of all of his officials or employees wherein contributions are made by such employer for the officials or employees or both for the purpose of distributing to such officials and employees the earnings and principal of the fund thus accumulated, and wherein it is provided in said plan that at no time shall any part of the corpus or income of the fund be used for or be diverted to any purpose other than for the exclusive benefit of the said officials and employees. Yun. So, yung retirement benefits, hindi yan kasali daw. Miscellaneous items na hindi rin kasali, o yung ang tawag dito, exclusions from gross income. Sabi, income derived from government, dun sa mga stocks, bonds, investments in Philippine loans, domestic securities, or from interest on deposit in banks in the Philippines by foreign governments, financing institutions owned, controlled, or enjoying refinancing from foreign governments, and international or regional financial institutions established by foreign governments. Ano pa ba? Income derived by government or its political subdivisions. Siyempre, hindi kasali sa gross income yan. Prizes and awards, sabi, made primarily in recognition of religious, charitable, scientific, educational, artistic, literary, or civic achievement. Kapag, sabi nga lamang dito, if the recipient was selected without any action on his part to enter the contest or proceeding, ayan, or the recipient is not required to render substantial future services as a condition to receiving the prize or award. Basta ikaw ay pinili ka lang na wala kang kahirap-hirap, yan ay exempt from gross income. Hindi yung prizes mo or winnings mo, hindi yan maituturing na gross income kasi may tuturing lamang kadalasan is in furtherance of profit. Ito, tumaya ka lang, wala ka namang kahirap-hirap. Letter D, prizes and awards in sports competition. Sabi, ano rin to, exempt from gross income. 13th month pay and other benefits, di ba? Provided na hindi ito lalagpas sa 82,000 pesos, no? Shall be exempt. Hindi siya ito tinuturing na gross income. Okay. Okay, may mga pagbabago na palang iba na hindi natin nabasa. Sige, balikan natin yan. Ito. Dito sa 13th month pay, hindi na 82,000 ngayon dahil nga may train law. 90,000 pesos na siya. Yung sinasabi doon. Tapos other benefits such as productivity incentives and Christmas bonus. O yun na. So tandaan natin, basta hindi lalagpas 90,000 yung 13th month pay and other benefits, hindi siya may tuturing na bahagi ng gross income. Ano namang logic bakit natin ayaw ituring na bahagi ng gross income? Bakit kinaklasify nila ito? Kasi pag naturing mo yung naitukoy mo ito as part of gross income, pwede ito maging taxable. Bakit? Ang ibig sabihin ng taxable income is gross income less the allowable deductions. Doon mo makukuha yung amount ng income mo na maaaring buwisan, di ba? Kaya hindi sinasama itong mga ito. Ano pa ba? Magtungo na tayo sa section 33. Okay. Special treatment of fringe benefit. Letter A, imposition of tax. Sabi rito, effective January 1, 2018. Yan, pagkaupo 2 years, magtulong Duterte dyan. And onwards, sabi, a final tax of 35% is hereby imposed on the grossed up monetary value of fringe benefit furnished or granted to the employee. Okay. Maliban na lamang yung rank and file employees as defined herein by the employer, whether an individual or a corporation. Sabi rito, whether the individual or a corporation, yon, period. Unless the fringe benefit daw is required by the nature or necessary to the trade, business, or profession of the employer, or when the fringe benefit is for the convenience or advantage of the employer. So, final tax ng 35% ang binibigay sa grossed up monetary value of fringe benefit na pinagkakaloob ng isang employer to the employer. Yun ang lang sinasabi niya, maliban na lamang kung yung fringe benefit is advantage ng employer. The tax herein imposed is payable to the employer, which tax shall be paid in the same manner as provided for under Section 57A of this code. The grossed up monetary value of the fringe benefit shall be determined by dividing the actual monetary value of the fringe benefit by 65% effective January 1, 2018 and onwards. Provided, however, yan, bago yun, nilagay ng train law yun, yung provision na yun. Provided, however, that fringe benefit furnished employees and taxable under subsections B, C, D, and E of Section 25 shall be taxed at the applicable rates thereat. Okay. Ano ba ibig sabihin ng fringe benefit? It means any good, service, or other benefit furnished or granted in cash or in kind by an employer to an individual employee. Hindi, maliban na nga lang daw, excluding or hindi kasama yung rank and file employees. Ano yung mga to? Housing, number 1. Number 2, expense account. Number 3, vehicle of any kind. Number 4, household personnel such as maid, driver, and others. Number 5, interest on loan at less than market rate to the extent of the difference between the market rate and actual rate granted. Number 6, membership fees, dues, and other expenses borne by the employer for the employee in social and athletic clubs or other similar organizations. Number 7, expenses for foreign travel. Number 8, holiday and vacation expenses. Number 9, educational assistance to the employee or his dependents. And number 10, life or health insurance and other non-life insurance premiums or similar amounts in excess of what the law allows. Ano-ano yung mga fringe benefits na not taxable under this section? Number one, fringe benefits which are authorized and exempted from tax under special laws. Merong ibang batas na nagsasabi natin itong mga ganitong uri ng fringe benefits. Ano pa ba? Contributions of the employer for the benefit of employee to retirement, insurance, and hospitalization benefit plans. Number three, benefits given to the rank and file employees, whether granted under a collective bargaining agreement. Number four, de minimis benefits is defined in the rules and regulations, no, to be promulgated by the Secretary of Finance upon recommendation of the Commissioner. Yung Secretary of Finance daw ay authorized, no, na gumawa ng mga regulasyon to carry out efficiency and fair interpretations ng provisions of this section, taking into account the peculiar nature and special need of the trade, business, or profession of the employer. Actually, medyo naguluhan ako kasi sinabi niya yung fringe benefits na not taxable, sinabi yung mga benepisyong binibigay sa rank and file. Sabi rito kanina, yung rank and file daw hindi kasama, no? May sinasabi siyang hindi kasama yung rank and file eh. Pero, sige, unawain na lang natin siya as is. Medyo nagugulahan din ako. Okay, section 34. Deductions from gross income. Ito may dinagdag din yung train law rito. Sabi rito, except for taxpayers earning compensation income arising from personal services rendered under an employer-employee relationship, where no deduction shall be allowed under this section, in computing taxable income, subject to income tax under sections 24A, 25A, 26, 27B, and C, and 28A1. There shall be allowed the following deductions from gross income. So ito yung mga papayagan na deduction, no, sa gross income para makuha natin yung taxable income. Expenses, yung mga ordinary and necessary trade, business, or professional expenses, di ba? Sabi naman dito, rule, there shall be allowed as deduction from gross income all the ordinary and necessary expenses, no? Ano ba yung mga ito? Reasonable allowance for salaries, wages, and other forms of compensation for personal services, di ba? Provided that the final tax imposed under Section 33 hereof has been paid. Ano pa ba yung mga reasonable? Ito, mga allowable deductions, reasonable allowance for travel expenses here and abroad while away from home in the pursuit of trade, business, or profession. Ano pa yung pangatlo? Reasonable allowance for rentals and or other payments which are required as a condition for the continued use or possession for purposes of the trade, business, or profession, di ba? At saka yung reasonable allowance for entertainment, amusement, and recreation expenses during the taxable year that are directly connected to the development, management, and operation of the trade, business, or profession of the taxpayer, di ba? So, yun yung mga itinuturing na ordinary and necessary trade, business, or professional expenses. Meron nga lamang substantiation requirements. Sabi rito, no deduction from gross income shall be allowed kapag pag walang official receipts, in the absence of official receipts or other adequate records. Okay. So, i-consider yung amount of the expense being deducted and the direct connection or relation of the expense being deducted to the development, management, operation, and or conduct of the trade, business, or profession of the taxpayer. Ano ba yung mga allowable na deduction? Tignan natin. Yung mga bribes daw, mga panunuhol, kickback, and other similar payments. Sabi rito, no deduction from gross income shall be allowed, sabi, for any payment made directly or indirectly as a bribe, kickback, or other similar payment. Hindi raw siya ina-allow. Okay. Ikalawa na about expenses. Ikalawang uri ng expenses. Yung una, yung mga nabanggit natin, mga pinapayagang ordinary expenses reasonable. Tapos, yung pangalawa, expenses allowable to private educational institutions. Ito yung Expenditures, otherwise considered as capital outlays of depreciable assets incurred during the taxable year for the expansion of school facilities, ina-allow din to deduct allowance for depreciation thereof under subsection F hereof. What about interest? In general daw, the amount of interest paid or incurred within a taxable year on indebtedness in connection with the taxpayer's profession, trade, business shall be allowed as a deductible form as deduction from gross income. So papayagan daw siya provided that the taxpayer's otherwise allowable deduction for interest expense shall be reduced by 42% of the interest income subjected to final tax. Provided that effective January 1, 2009, the percentage shall be 33%. Okay. So, yung deduction niya ay na-reduce na sa 33%. Ano naman yung mga exemptions? Ano naman yung hindi papayagan? No deduction shall be allowed in respect of interest under the succeeding paragraphs. Letter A, if within the taxable year an individual taxpayer reporting income on the cash basis incurs an indebtedness on which an interest is paid in advance through discount or otherwise. Okay. Provided that such interest shall be allowed as a deduction in the year the indebtedness is paid. Provided further that if the indebtedness is payable in periodic amortizations, the amount of interest which corresponds to the amount of the principal amortized or paid during the year shall be allowed as deduction in such taxable year. Letter B, if both the taxpayer and the person to whom the payment has been made or is to be made are persons specified under 36B, section 36B. And letter C, if the indebtedness is incurred to finance petroleum exploration. Ano naman ito? Optional treatment of interest expense. At the option of the taxpayer, interest incurred to acquire property used in trade, business, or exercise of a profession may be allowed as a deduction or treated as a capital expenditure. Pag-usapan naman natin taxes. Sabi rito, in general, taxes paid or incurred within the taxable year in connection with the taxpayer's profession, trade, or business shall be allowed deduction. Yung mabuhis na binayad niya shall be allowed deduction maliban na lamang except letter A, the income tax provided for under this title. Yung income tax na binayaran mo, hindi mo siya pwedeng isama sa deduction mo. Letter B, income taxes imposed by authority of any foreign country. But this deduction shall be allowed in the case of a taxpayer who does not signify in his return his desire to have to any extent the benefits of paragraph 3 of this subsection relating to credits for taxes of foreign countries. Letter C, estate and donors taxes. Hindi mo yan maaaring ilagay as deduction. And letter D, taxes assessed against local benefits of a kind tending to increase the value of the property assessed. So, pinakamahalaga dito, yung pinaka-common, income tax, tsaka yung mga estate and donors taxes. Hindi mo pwedeng ilagay as deduction mo. Ano naman yung mga limitations on deductions? Sabi rito, in the case of a non-resident alien individual engaged in trade or business in the Philippines and the resident foreign corporation, the deductions for taxes provided in paragraph 1 of the subsection C shall be allowed only if and to the extent that they are connected with income from sources within the Philippines. May kinalaman lamang yung kita nila sa mga sources nila dito sa loob ng Pilipinas. Credit against tax for taxes of foreign countries. Sabi rito, if the taxpayer signifies in his return, yung ibig sabihin ng return, yung kanyang tax return, his desire to have benefit of this paragraph, the tax imposed by this title shall be credited with letter A, citizen and domestic corporation. In the case of a citizen of the Philippines and of a domestic corporation, the amount of income taxes paid or incurred during the taxable year to any foreign country, and letter B, partnerships and estates. So in the case of any such individual who is a member of a general professional partnership or a beneficiary of an estate or trust, his proportionate share of such taxes of the general professional partnership or the estate or trust paid or incurred during the taxable year to a foreign country, if his distributive share of the income of such partnership or trust is reported for taxation under this title. An alien individual and a foreign corporation shall not be allowed the credits against the tax for the taxes of foreign countries allowed under this paragraph. Number 4, limitations on credit. Ano ba yung mga limitation? Letter A, the amount of the credit in respect to the tax paid or incurred to any country shall not exceed the same proportion of the tax against which such credit is taken, which the taxpayer's taxable income from sources within such country under this title bears to his entire taxable income for the same taxable year. And letter B, the total amount of the credit shall not exceed the same proportion of the tax against which such credit is taken, which the taxpayer's taxable income from sources without the Philippines taxable under this title bears to his entire taxable income from the same taxable year. Number 5, adjustments on payments of incurred taxes. If accrued taxes when paid, sabi niya, differ from the amounts claimed as credits by the taxpayer, or if a tax paid is refunded in whole or in part, the taxpayer shall notify the commissioner, who shall redetermine the amount of the tax for the year or years affected, and the amount of tax due upon such redetermination, if any, shall be paid by the taxpayer upon notice and demand by the commissioner, or the amount of tax overpaid, if any, shall be credited or refunded to the taxpayer. In the case of such a tax incurred but not paid, the commissioner, as a condition precedent to the allowance of this credit, may require the taxpayer to give a bond with sureties satisfactory to and to be approved by the commissioner in such sum as he may require, conditioned upon the payment by the taxpayer of any amount of tax found due upon any such redetermination. The bond herein prescribed shall contain such further conditions as the commissioner may require. Okay. Number 6, year in which credit is taken. The credits provided in subsection C3 of this section may, at the option of the taxpayer and irrespective of the method of accounting employed in keeping his books, it may be taken in the year. So, the credits provided rito may be taken in the year which the taxes of the foreign country were incurred, subject, however, to the conditions prescribed in subsection C of this section. If the taxpayer elects to take such credits in the year in which the taxes of the foreign country accrued, the credits for all subsequent years shall be taken upon the same basis, and no portion of any such taxes shall be allowed as a deduction in the same or any succeeding year. Proof of credits. The credits provided in subsection C3 shall be allowed only if the taxpayer establishes to the satisfaction of the commissioner, na-satisfy si BIR commissioner dahil na-establish na, letter A, the total amount of income derived from sources without or outside the Philippines. Letter B, the amount of income derived from each country, the tax paid or incurred is claimed as a credit under paragraph, such amount to be determined under rules and regulations prescribed by the Secretary of Finance. Ito yung merong income. Yung mga income mo na kinita mo sa ibang bansa, nagbayad ka ng buwis doon, tapos kiniklaim mo as credit dito sa atin. Depende raw yun sa rules and regulations na ipinescribe ng Secretary of Finance. And letter C, all other information necessary for the verification and computation of such credits. Okay. Napakahaba nito. How about yung losses? Sayin nga natin yung losses. In general, the losses actually sustained during the taxable year and not compensated for by insurance. Hindi na compensate yung losses mo by insurance or other forms of indemnity shall be allowed as deductions. Letter A, if incurred in trade, profession, or business. Or letter B, if property connected with a trade, business, or profession, if the loss arises from fires, storms, shipwreck, or other casualties, or from robbery, theft, or embezzlement. The Secretary of Finance, upon recommendation of the Commissioner, is hereby authorized to promulgate rules and regulations prescribing, among other things, the time and manner by which the taxpayer shall submit a declaration of loss sustained from casualty or from robbery, theft, or embezzlement during the taxable year, provided, however, that the time limit to be so prescribed in the rules and regulations shall not be less than 30 days, nor more than 90 days from the date of discovery of the casualty or robbery, theft, or embezzlement giving rise to the loss. Letter C. No loss shall be allowed as a deduction under this subsection if at the time of the filing of the return such loss has been claimed as a deduction for estate tax purposes in the estate tax return. So pinag-usapan natin yung mga loss, di ba? Yung mga pagkawala na papayagan daw na maging deduction. So kailangan ng proof of loss. In the case of a non-resident alien, individual, or foreign corporation, the losses deductible shall be those actually sustained during the year incurred in business, trade, or exercise of a profession conducted within the Philippines when such losses are compensated for by insurance or other forms of indemnity, sabi rito. The Secretary of Finance, upon recommendation of the Commissioner, is hereby authorized to promulgate rules and regulations prescribing, among other things, the time and manner by which the taxpayer shall submit a declaration of loss sustained from casualty or from robbery, theft, or embezzlement during the taxable year, provided that the time to be so prescribed in the rules and regulations shall not be less than 30 days or more than 90 days. Hindi siya less than 30 days, hindi rin siya more than 90 days from the date of discovery of the casualty or robbery, theft, or embezzlement giving rise to the loss, di ba? So, kailangan mag-ano ka na? Anong tawag dito? Kumbaga, i-declare mo na yung loss mo. 30, hindi bababa sa 30 days upon the discovery ng loss mo na nasanhi ng pagnanakaw, theft, or whatever, at hindi naman lalagpas sa 90 days upon your discovery. Kasi pag nagbigay sila ng period na ganyan, kailangan sundin. Number 3, net operating loss carryover. Sabi rito, the net operating loss of the business or enterprise for any taxable year immediately preceding the current taxable year, which had not been previously offset. Okay? Di pa siya na-offset as deduction from gross income. Okay? Shall be carried over. Deduction shall be carried over as deduction from gross income from the next 3 consecutive taxable years immediately following the year of such loss, provided, however, that any net loss incurred in a taxable year during which the taxpayer was exempt from income tax shall not be allowed as a deduction under this subsection. Provided further that a net operating loss carryover shall be allowed only if there has been no substantial change in the ownership of the business or enterprise in that, number 1, not less than 75% in nominal value of outstanding issued shares if the business is in the name of a corporation, is held by or on behalf of the same persons, or number 2, sabi niya, not less than 75% of the paid up. Ay, nawala. Ba yan? Ano ba naman yan? Yan. Not less than 75% of the paid up capital of the corporation if the business is in the name of a corporation, is held by or on behalf of the same persons. Ibig daw sabihin ng net operating loss yung excess of allowable deduction over gross income of the business in a taxable year. Yun ang ibig sabihin yun ang net operating loss. Yung sumobra sa allowable deduction o sa payagan na i-deduct mo, i-divide mo by your gross income. Okay. Okay, provided that for mines other than oil and gas, a net operating loss without the benefit of incentives provided for under EO 226 as amended, yung tinatawag na Omnibus Investment Code, incurred in any of the first 10 years of operation may be carried over as a deduction from taxable income for the next 5 years immediately following the year of such loss. Pag-usapan naman natin yung capital losses. Loss from sales or exchanges of capital assets shall be allowed only to the extent provided in Section 39. Di pa tayo nagpupunta dyan. Sabi pa rito, letter B, if securities as defined in Section 22T become worthless during the taxable year and are capital assets, the loss resulting therefrom shall, for purposes of this title, be considered as a loss from the sale or exchange on the last day of such taxable year of capital assets. Losses from wash sales of stock or securities as provided in Section 38. May tuturing siya na capital loss, no? Capital loss. Isa siya sa mga capital losses. Wagering losses. Losses from wagering transactions shall be allowed only to the extent of the gains from such transactions. Pero bago tayo tumuloy, basahin muna natin yung wash sales. Hanapin lang natin ibig sabihin ng wash sales, di ba? Para lang alam natin. Para may idea tayo mga kalayman. Pagpasensya nyo na lang at wala pa akong researcher eh. Diba? Maganda sana kung meron kang meron kang taga parang si Joe Rogan. Hey Mickey. Mickey ba yung Mikey? Hahanapin mo. Wash sales. Ano ibig sabihin nito? Dali lang Kasi tinuturo siya na capital loss eh. A wash sale is a transaction in which an investor seeks to maximize tax benefits by selling a losing security at the end of a calendar year so they can claim a capital loss on taxes that year. The investor's intent is likely to repurchase the security again after the start of the new year, if possible, even lower than where they sold. Such wash sales are a method investors have historically considered to recognize a tax loss without limiting their exposure to opportunity they perceive in owning a particular security. The IRS uses the wash sale rule to eliminate the incentive to arbitrarily sell and reacquire the same security around the year of the calendar year. So, ito, yung investor, gusto niyang i-maximize yung kanyang tax benefits. So, binenta niya ang isang losing security sa dulo ng calendar year para siguro maging deduction nila yan, no? They can claim a capital loss on the taxes. Mas maliit yung babayaran nilang buwis kasi patalo sila eh. Pero bibilin din nila ito, most likely, bibilin din nila ulit ito sa mas murang halaga. Yun ang sinasabi rito. Ano naman ibig sabihin ng wagering losses? Hanapin natin. Wagering. Parang kung di ako nagkakamali, ito yung nakikipag negosasyon ka sa iyong pagkatalo. Tingnan natin. Yan natin ibig niyang sabihin. As a gambling, no? If you participate in wagering or gambling, your taxable gains from those transactions can be reduced by your wagering losses even if the underlying dealings are illegal. O kahit illegal pa siya, no? So, nagiging deduction siya. Yung mga patalo mo sa gambling. Okay. Wagering losses yung pala siya. Okay, abandonment losses. Letter A, in the event a contract area where petroleum operations are undertaken is partially or wholly abandoned, all accumulated exploration and development expenditures pertaining thereto shall be allowed as deduction. Letter B, ano ba to? In case of producing well okay, is subsequently abandoned, an unamortized costs thereof, as well as the undepreciated costs of equipment directly used therein, shall be allowed as a deduction in the year such well, equipment, or facility is abandoned by the contractor. Provided na nga lang that if such abandoned well is re-entered and production is resumed, or if such equipment or facility is restored into service, the said costs shall be included as part of gross income in the year of resumption or restoration and shall be amortized or depreciated as the case may be. Okay, magpupunta muna tayo sa bad debts, pero may hinahanap lang ako. Babalikan natin. Bad debts. Anong section na ito? Wait lang. Bad debts. Alam ko, nasa 34 pa rin tayo. Sobrang haba naman yata ng section 34, no? Sobra naman. Okay. Hindi ko mahanap. Ang haba niya. 34. Dali ah. Sobrang haba ng 34. Sobrang haba ng 34. Sobrang haba ng section 34. Okay, nandito na tayo sa bad debts. Sabi dito, in general, debts due to the taxpayer actually ascertained to be worthless and charged off within the taxable year, except those not connected with profession, trade, or business, and those sustained in a transaction entered into between parties mentioned under Section 636B of this code. Provided that recovery of bad debts previously allowed as deduction in the preceding years shall be included as part of the gross income in the year of recovery to the extent of the income tax benefit of said deduction. Securities becoming worthless, sabi rito. Pagka naging worthless na sila and charged off within the taxable year and are capital assets, the loss resulting therefrom shall, in the case of a taxpayer other than a bank or trust company incorporated under the laws of the Philippines, a substantial part of whose business is the receipt of deposits for the purpose of this title, be considered as a loss from the sale or exchange on the last day of such taxable year of capital assets. Pag pinag-usapan naman natin ang depreciation, ano pa rin to? Section 34, ha? There shall be allowed as a depreciation reduction a reasonable allowance for the exhaustion, wear and tear or property used in trade or business. Allowed yun. Okay, ayun namang use of certain methods of rates. The term reasonable allowance, sabi nito, yung mga sang-ayon nito doon sa sinasabing reasonable allowance na pinescribe ng Secretary of Finance under the following rules. Letter A, the straight line method. Letter B, declining balance method, using a rate not exceeding twice the rate which would have been used had the annual allowance been computed under the method described in subsection F. Letter C, the sum of the year's digit method. And letter D, any other method which may be prescribed by the Secretary of Finance upon the recommendation of the Commissioner of the BIR. Hindi ko sila alam kung ano yung methods na yan. Ang method yan. Pag-usapan naman natin yung agreement as to useful life on which depreciation rate is based. Sabi dito, we're under the rules and regulations prescribed by the Secretary of Finance upon recommendation of the Commissioner. Yung taxpayer and Commissioner have entered into an agreement in writing specifically dealing with the useful life and rate of depreciation of any property. The rate so agreed upon shall be binding on both the taxpayer and the national government in the absence of facts and circumstances not taken into consideration during the adoption of such agreement. Okay, so binding ito. The responsibility of establishing the existence of such facts and circumstances shall rest with the party initiating the modification. Doon naman tayo sa depreciation of properties used in petroleum operations. Sabi rito, an allowance for depreciation in respect of all properties directly related to production of petroleum, no, shall be allowed under the straight line or declining balance method of depreciation at the option of the service contractor. Eh ano naman tong depreciation of properties used in mining? So, bibigyan din sila ng allowance for depreciation, no? And it shall be computed as follows. Letter A, at the normal rate of depreciation if the expected life is 10 years or less. Letter B, depreciated over any number of years between 5 years and the expected life if the latter is more than 10 years, and the depreciation thereon allowed as deduction from the taxable income, provided that the contractor notifies the commissioner at the beginning of the depreciation period which depreciation rate allowed by this section will be used. Siyempre, tinimbrehan mo na muna yung commissioner kung ano yung ginagamit mong pamamaraan para computein mo yung depreciation. How about yung depreciation deductible by non-resident aliens engaged in trade or business or resident foreign corporations? Sabi, sa kaso nila, a reasonable allowance for the deterioration of property arising out of its use or employment or its non-use in the business, trade, or profession shall be permitted only when such property is located in the Philippines. Letter G, depletion of oil and gas wells and mines. In general, in the case of oil and gas wells or mines, a reasonable allowance for depletion or amortization computed in accordance with the cost depletion method shall be granted. Sabi, meron din sila, papayagan din sila, no? Huwag natin basahin lahat kasi sobrang haba. How about yung election to deduct exploration and development expenditures? Sabi rito, in computing taxable income from mining operations, the taxpayer may, at his option, deduct exploration and development expenditures accumulated as cost or adjusted basis for cost depletion as of date of prospecting, as well as exploration and development expenditures paid or incurred during the taxable year, provided that the amount deductible for exploration and development expenditures shall not exceed 25% of the net income from mining operations computed without the benefit of any tax incentives under existing laws. Sabi rito, no? The amount deductible for exploration and development expenditures shall not exceed 25%, no, of the net income from mining operations. The actual exploration and development expenditures minus 25% of the net income from mining shall be carried forward to the succeeding years until fully deducted. Sabi rito, the election by the taxpayer to deduct the exploration and development expenditures is irrevocable and shall be binding in succeeding taxable years. So, ang sabi raw dito, pagdating sa net income from mining operations, no, shall mean gross income from operations, less allowable deductions which are necessary or related to mining operations. Ano yung mga ito? Yung mga mining, milling, marketing expenses, depreciation of properties na sa mga gamit na direktang ginagamit sa pagmimina. The term exploration expenditures means expenditures paid or incurred for the purpose of ascertaining the distance, location, extent, or quality of any deposit or other mineral and paid or incurred before the beginning of the development stage of the mine deposit. The term development expenditures means expenditures paid or incurred during the development stage of the mine or other natural deposits. Ano naman tong in the case of a non-resident alien individual engaged in trade or business in the Philippines or a resident foreign corporation. Allowance for depletion of oil and gas wells or mines under paragraph 1 of this subsection shall be authorized only in respect to oil and gas wells or mines located within the Philippines. Paano naman yung mga charitable and other contributions, no? Sabi rito, contributions or gifts actually paid or made within the taxable year or to or for the use of the government of the Philippines or any of its agencies or any political subdivision thereof exclusively for public purposes or to accredited domestic corporation or associations organized and operated exclusively for religious, charitable, scientific, youth, and sports development, cultural or educational purposes, or for the rehabilitation of veterans, or to social welfare institutions, or to non-government organizations, sabi rito, in accordance with the rules and regulations promulgated by the Secretary of Finance, upon recommendation of the Commissioner, sabi niya, no part of the net income of which inures to the benefit of any private stockholder or individual in an amount not in excess of 10% in the case of an individual and 5% in the case of a corporation of the taxpayer's taxable income derived from trade, business, or profession is computed without the benefit of this and the following sub-paragraphs. Dami, no? Iba paano naman, sabi rito, no? Contributions deductible in full, sabi rito, donations to the government of the Philippines or to any of its agencies or political subdivisions, sabi, donation sa NEDA, ganyan. Deductible daw siya provided that any donation which is made to the government or to any of its agencies or political subdivisions shall be subject to the limitations prescribed in paragraph 1 of this subsection. So, deductible ang mga donasyon sa government, no? Okay, iniengganyo nila mag-donate tayo sa kanila, no, para tumulong. Donations to foreign institutions or international organizations which are fully deductible in pursuance of or in compliance with treaties or agreements daw or special laws, deductible din yan. Donations to accredited NGOs, deductible din, sabi. Wow, okay. So, subject to the terms and conditions as may be prescribed by the Secretary of Finance, ang ibig sabihin daw ng utilization ay any amount in cash or in kind, paid or utilized to accomplish one or more purposes for which the accredited NGO was created or organized. Okay, so, ito yung mga, kumbaga parang basihan na rin kung para masabi natin na ginagamit nga ba ng NGO yung pera na iyong dinonate? O dili naman, number 2, any amount paid to acquire an asset used directly in carrying out one or more purposes for which the accredited NGO was created or organized. Okay, valuation. The amount of any charitable contribution of property other than money shall be based on the acquisition cost of said property. Proof of deductions. Contributions or gifts shall be allowable as deductions only if verified under the rules and regulations prescribed by the Secretary of Finance upon recommendation of the Commissioner. So, ano naman yung research and development? As to research and development, ang sabi rito, a taxpayer may treat research or development expenditures which are paid or incurred by him during the taxable year in connection with his trade, diba? Or business or profession as ordinary and necessary expenses which are not chargeable to capital account. Okay, pagdating sa research and development, pwede pala, no? Sabi rito, the election of the taxpayer, di ba? The following research and development expenditures may be treated as deferred expenses. Ito yung, ano yung mga pwedeng itrato natin as deferred expenses ng mga research and development na gawain. Letter A, paid or incurred by the taxpayer in connection with his trade, business, or profession. Letter B, not treated as expense under paragraph 1 hereof. And letter C, chargeable to capital account but not chargeable to property of a character which is subject to depreciation or depletion. Sabi dito, in computing taxable income, such deferred expenses shall be allowed as deduction, ratably distributed over a period of not less than 60 months, as may be elected by the taxpayer, beginning with the month in which the taxpayer first realizes benefits from such expenditures. So saan naman hindi mag-a-apply yung mga pinagsasabi natin? The limitations on deduction. Letter A, any expenditure for the acquisition or improvement of land or for the improvement of property to be used in connection with research, di siya kasali. Letter B, any expenditure paid or incurred for the purpose of ascertaining the existence, location, extent, or quality of any deposit of ore or other mineral including oil or gas. So hindi sila kasali no sa pwedeng allowable deductions. Dahil lang, pahinga muna tayo. Napakahaba pala nitong 34, no? Sobrang haba ng section 34 na ito. Okay. So yun, napakaraming at least na ano naman natin, nadadaanan natin lahat ng mga important naman na nababasa naman natin. Kahit pa paano. Sasabi pa rito, ano pa rin to ha? Walang kamatayang Section 34 ha? ng National Internal Revenue Code. Sabi rito, an employer establishing or maintaining a pension trust. Diba? Sabi nga rito, allowed. Diba? Sabi, allowed siya as a deduction under subsection A1 of the section. But only if such amount, sabi niya, has not theretofore been allowed as deduction, hindi pa siya dating napayagan as deduction, and is apportioned in equal parts over a period of 10 consecutive years, beginning with the year in which the transfer or payment is made. Ano pa bang ibang sinasabi dito? Any amount paid or payable which is otherwise deductible from or taken into account in computing gross income or for which depreciation or amortization may be allowed under this section shall be allowed as a deduction only if it is shown that the tax required to be deducted and withheld therefrom has been paid to the Bureau of Internal Revenue in accordance with Section 58 and 81 of this code. O ito yung optional standard deduction. Ano? Dito kasi merong dinagdag si train law. Basahin natin. Optional standard deduction, very important to, OSD. In lieu of the deductions allowed under the preceding subsections, an individual subject to tax under Section 24, other than a non-resident alien, may elect a standard deduction in an amount not exceeding 40% of his gross sales or gross receipts, as the case may be. In the case of a corporation subject to tax under Sections 27A and 28A1, it may elect, sabi, no? So, taga lang, wait lang. So, yung isang individual daw, sabi, unahin natin, may elect, pwede siyang mamili ng 40%, di ba? Standard deduction in an amount na hindi lalagpas sa 40% of his gross sales or gross receipts, pwede yun. Para mas madali lang to Kunin mo lang yung gross sales or gross receipts mo. Tapos, yung amount na hindi lalagpas sa 40% nun, yun na yung iyong optional standard deduction. Pag corporation naman daw, it may elect a standard deduction in amount, ganun din, not exceeding 40% of its gross income naman. Okay? Yung isa, ang pinag-uusapan yung iyong mga resibo, gross sales and gross receipts, 40% nun pag individual ka. Kapag naman ikaw ay corporation, yun namang 40% of your gross income. Income naman ang pagbabasehan. Gross income as defined in Section 32 of this code, no? Sabi rito, unless the taxpayer signifies in his return his intention, wag na yan. Basahin na lang natin to. Sige. Unless the taxpayer signifies in his return his intention to elect the optional standard deduction, he shall be considered as having availed himself of the deductions allowed in the preceding subsections. Such election when made in the return shall be irrevocable for the taxable year for which the return is made, provided that an individual who is entitled to and claimed for the optional standard deduction shall not be required to submit with his tax return such financial statements otherwise required under this code. Ito na yung dinagdag ng train law. Provided further that a general professional partnership and partners comprising such partnership may avail of the optional standard deduction only once, either by the general professional partnership or the partners comprising the partnership. Yun yung dinagdag, no? Provided finally that except when the commissioner otherwise permits, the said individual shall keep such records pertaining to his gross sales or gross receipts. Okay? Or the said corporation shall keep such records pertaining to his gross income as defined in Section 32 of this code during the taxable year, as may be required by the rules and regulations promulgated by the Secretary of Finance upon recommendation of the Commissioner. Okay. So, merong mga na-delete na subsect. May mga na-delete na nakasulat dito. May deleted. Yung letter M deleted. Pero ituloy natin yung hindi deleted. Sabi rito, notwithstanding the provision of the preceding subsections, the Secretary of Finance, upon recommendation of the Commissioner, after a public hearing shall have been held for this purpose, may prescribe by rules and regulations limitations or ceilings for any of the itemized deductions under subsections A to J of this subsection, provided that for purposes of determining such ceilings or limitations, the Secretary of Finance shall consider the following factors. Una-una, yung adequacy of the prescribed limits on the actual expenditure requirements of each particular industry. And number two, yung effects of inflation on expenditure levels, provided further that no ceilings shall further be imposed on items of expense already subject to ceilings under present law. Yung Section 35 na pagkahaba-haba ay inalis na. Okay? Wala na. Yung section 35, no? Okay, so tignan nga natin kung kaya pa natin magbasa ng iba. Wala na yung section 35 eh. Okay, wait lang ha. Section 35. Wala na ito. Basahin natin yung section 36. Items not deductible. In computing net income, as a general rule ito, no? In computing net income, no deduction shall in any case be allowed in respect to, number 1, personal living or family expenses. Number 2, any amount paid out for new buildings or for permanent improvements or betterments made to increase the value of any property of or estate. Pero itong sinabi kong yon shall not apply to intangible drilling and development costs in form. Number 3, any amount expended in resorting property or in making good the exhaustion thereof for which an allowance is or has been made. Or number 4, premiums paid on any life insurance policy covering the life of any officer or employee or of any person financially interested in any trade or business carried on by the taxpayer, individual or corporate, when the taxpayer is directly or indirectly a beneficiary under such policy. Letter B, section 36. In computing net income, no deductions shall be in any case be allowed in respect of losses from sales or exchanges of property directly or indirectly. Number 1, between members of the family. Sabi niya, for purposes of this paragraph, the family of an individual shall include only his brothers and sisters, whether by the whole or half-blood, spouse, ancestors, and lineal descendants. So, yung losses sa pag-exchange nyo ng property ng mga magkakapamilya, hindi sila kasali in computing net income, no? Number 2, except in the case of distributions and liquidation between an individual and corporation more than 50% in value of the outstanding stock of which is owned directly or indirectly by or for such individual, hindi siya kasaling i-compute, no? Okay, number 3, except in the case of distributions and liquidation, hindi kasali yung mga usapin ng liquidation, between two corporations more than 50% in value of the outstanding stock of which is owned directly or indirectly by or for the same individual. If either one of such corporations with respect to the taxable year of the corporation preceding the date of the sale of exchange was under the law applicable to such taxable year, a personal holding company or a foreign personal holding company, no? Number 4, between the grantor and the fiduciary of any trust. Hindi yan kasali, no? Hindi yan kasali para computein mo yung net income. Number 5, between the fiduciary of and the fiduciary of a trust and the fiduciary of another trust if the same person is a grantor with respect to each trust. And number 6, between a fiduciary of a trust and beneficiary of such trust. So, ito yung mga hindi siya kasali. Walang deduction mula sa mga nabanggit natin na yun ang papayagan in computing net income. Section 37, sabi rito, special provisions regarding income and deductions of insurance companies, whether domestic or foreign. Sabi rito, in the case of insurance companies, whether domestic or foreign doing business in the Philippines, the net additions, if any, required by law to be paid within the year to reserve funds, and the sums other than dividends paid within the year on policy and annuity contracts may be deducted from their gross income, provided, however, that the released reserve be treated as income for the year of release. Okay. Ito yung mga reserve funds. Pwede siyang i-deduct sa gross income. Provided na itong mga released reserve na to na dineduct mo from the gross income, ititrato mo siya as income for the year of release. Letter B, mutual insurance companies. In the case of mutual fire and mutual employers liability, the mutual workmen's compensation and mutual casualty insurance companies requiring their members to make premium deposits to provide for losses and expenses. Said companies shall not return as income any portion of the premium deposits returned to their policyholders, but shall return as taxable income all income received by them from all other sources, plus such portion of the premium deposits as are retained by the companies for purposes other than the payment of losses and expenses and reinsurance reserves. Letter C, yung mutual marine insurance companies, sabi, shall include in their return of gross income, gross premiums collected and received by them, less amounts paid to policyholders on account of premiums previously paid by them, and interest paid upon those amounts between the ascertainment and payment thereof. Letter D, assessment insurance companies, whether domestic or foreign, may deduct from their gross income the actual deposit of sums with the officers of the government of the Philippines pursuant to law as additions to guarantee or reserve funds. Okay. Sahin na rin natin to. 38. Okay, losses from wash sales or stock securities. Medyo nalaman na natin kung ano yung wash sale, di ba? Yung mga losses dyan, sabi rito. Letter A, in the case of any loss claimed to have been sustained from any sale or other disposition of shares of stock or securities where it appears that within a period beginning 30 days before the date of such sale or disposition and ending 30 days after such date, the taxpayer has acquired, no? Na-acquire niya ito by purchase or by exchange upon which the entire amount of gain or loss was recognized by law, or has entered into a contract, or has entered into a contact daw, baka contract nga ito, or option so to acquire substantially identical stock or securities, then no deduction for the loss shall be allowed under Section 34 unless the claim is made by a dealer in stock or securities and with respect to a transaction made in the ordinary course of the business of such dealer. Ito yung mga wash sales. Ating basahin yan. Meron pang dalawa pero ating basahin. Section 39, capital gains and losses. Ayan. Maganda ito, may mga definition of terms So, basahin natin yung capital assets. Sabi rito, means property held by the taxpayer, whether or not connected with his trade or business, but that does not include stock in trade of the taxpayer or other property of a kind, which would properly be included in the inventory of the taxpayer if on hand at the close of the taxable year, or property held by the taxpayer primarily for sale to customers in the ordinary course of his trade or business, or property used in the trade or business of a character which is subject to the allowance for depreciation provided in subsection F of Section 34, or real property used in trade or business of the taxpayer. So, hindi kasama sa inventory. Yun ang capital assets, no? Ano ibig sabihin ng net capital gain? It means the excess of the gains from the sales or exchanges of capital asset over the losses from such sales or exchanges. Net capital loss means the excess of losses is sobra sa mga losses, no, from sales or exchanges of capital assets over the gains from such sales or exchanges. Mas mataas yung loss mo kaysa sa yung mga gains. Ano namang ibig sabihin ng percentage taken into account? Sabi dito, in the case of a taxpayer other than a corporation, only the following percentages of the gain or loss recognized upon the sale or exchange of capital assets shall be taken into account in computing net capital gain, net capital loss, and net income. Number 1, 100% if the capital asset has been held for not more than 12 months. And number 2, 50% naman if the capital asset has been held for more than 12 months. Letter C, limitation on capital assets. Sabi niya rito, losses from sale or exchanges of capital assets shall be allowed only to the extent of the gains from such sales or exchanges. Net capital loss carryover, ano ibig sabihin nito? If any taxpayer other than a corporation sustains in any taxable year a net capital loss, such loss shall be treated in the succeeding taxable year as a loss for the sale, as a loss from the sale or exchange of capital asset held for not more than 12 months. So, i-carry over mo siya. Sabi rito, basta any taxpayer maliban sa korporasyon, sabi, meron kang net capital loss. Okay, dun sa taxable year na yon. Sa susunod na taxable year, itatrato pa rin siyang loss from the sale or exchange of a capital asset held for not more than 12 months. Ano sa mahirap unawain, no? Pakahirap nilang unawain din eh. Retirement of bonds, sabi, for purposes of this title, amounts received by the holder upon the retirement of bonds, debentures, notes, or certificates or other evidences of indebtedness issued by any corporation, including those issued by a government or political subdivision thereof, with interest coupons or in registered form, shall be considered as amounts received in exchange therefore. Letter F, gains or losses from short sales, etc. Sabi rito, gains or losses from short sales of property shall be considered as gains or losses from sales or exchanges of capital assets. And number 2, gains or losses attributable to the failure to exercise privileges or options to buy or sell property shall be considered as capital gains or losses. Okay. Okay, mahaba-haba na ito. Dito naman tayo magtatapos sa 39, no? Section 39. So sana medyo nag-enjoy kayo ako. Nahirapan ako sa terms, pero sigurado ako yung mga accounting students o yung mga CPA, yung mga law students na mga CPA, sigurado masusundan nyo ng mainam itong taxation, no? So anyway, ako nga pala si Lord Ray, mag-pray muna tayo. Glory be to the Father, to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and never shall be, world without end. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. So doon po tayo nagtatapos ngayon. Section 39 ng National Internal Revenue Code at ng together with the train law, no? So sana po samahan niyo ulit ako magbasa sa mga susunod at subukan natin ito ipaliwanag. Although ang hirap ipaliwanag nito in layman's term. Good night.